Somewhere on the other side of Chicago, a man named Ethan Carter was taping a bank notice to the inside of his own shop window, 3 payments behind, and too proud to let his customers read it from the street. He had never heard the name Isabella Moretti. He had no idea he was only weeks away from doing the one thing nobody in this city had done in 20 years, telling her no, and meaning it, and living to run his hands over an engine the next morning. But to understand how one quiet word from a broke mechanic could break every rule the most feared woman in Chicago had built her life on, you first have to meet her the way her enemies did. The last man who stole from Isabella Moretti was sitting across from her now, and he had made the mistake of thinking her calm meant mercy. His name was Renzo. He'd skimmed $40,000 over 8 months, a little at a time, the way men do when they've decided they're smarter than the person signing their checks. Now he sat in the back room of her restaurant on Taylor Street, and Isabella poured him a glass of wine with her own hand, and the 2 men standing by the door stared at the floor because they could not stand to watch. "Drink," she said. "You look pale." Renzo drank. His hand shook so badly the glass clicked against his teeth. Isabella was 52, and she wore her age like jewelry, a silver streak in dark hair she refused to dye, a stillness that made loud men go quiet. She didn't raise her voice. In 30 years, no one could remember her raising her voice. That was the terrifying part. When Isabella Moretti was angry, the temperature in a room simply dropped, and grown men found reasons to be somewhere else. "You have 3 children," she said. "The youngest just started at St. Ignatius. Good school." Renzo started to cry. "I'm not going to touch your children," she said almost gently. "I'm not an animal, but by Friday you'll have sold your house, your car, and that boat you're so proud of, and you'll have paid me back every dollar, plus what it cost me to find out. And then you'll leave Chicago, and you'll tell people you retired." She sipped her own wine. "Because the alternative is that I stop being reasonable, and Renzo, you've never seen me stop being reasonable." He was gone within the week. That was how the city worked. People lowered their heads when her car passed. A certain kind of policeman found it convenient to look the other way. And her rivals, the Barone family, who had wanted Moretti territory for a decade, watched from a distance and waited for the day she'd finally show a soft spot. They were about to get their wish. Because what none of them knew was that the most feared woman in Chicago spent every night sitting on the concrete floor of her garage, in front of 3 wooden crates she could not bring herself to open. The crates held a motorcycle, and the motorcycle was all she had left of her son. Luca Moretti had been the one soft thing in her hard world, 26 years old, with his father's smile and none of his father's cruelty. He was supposed to inherit the family. Instead, he wanted to inherit a garage. He loved engines more than money, which in the Moretti family was very nearly treason, and she loved him helplessly for it. The bike was a 1974 Moto Guzzi, Italian like them. He'd found it rotting in a barn in Wisconsin and spent 2 years rebuilding it, cursing in 2 languages. Grease worked so deep into his knuckles it never fully came out. "When it's done, Ma, I'm taking you out on it. Lakeshore Drive, top down." "It's a motorcycle, Luca. There's no top. You know what I mean." She never got the ride. 14 months ago, on a wet Tuesday, a delivery truck ran a red light on Ashland Avenue. There was no enemy in it, no hit, no message, no war, just rain and physics, and a mother who suddenly understood she had built an entire empire to protect one person, and it had protected him from nothing. The Guzzi came back from the crash in pieces, the forks bent like drinking straws, the tank split. The engine Luca had loved like a living thing, seized solid, and Isabella, who had never once failed to solve a problem with enough pressure or enough money, sat in front of those crates for 11 months and could not lift the lid. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She put a price on it, $50,000, cash, to anyone who could restore the motorcycle exactly as it was. Every decal, every scratch, including the small dent in the tank Luca had refused to fix because he said that was where the story lived. The offer moved through the city fast, because 50 grand for a bike restoration is deranged money, 10 times the job. Restorers came from 3 states, and one by one, they failed. Not because they lacked skill, because they slowly realized they hadn't been hired to fix a motorcycle. They'd been hired to fix her, and no one alive could do that. 6 of them quit. The 7th she sent away for calling it just an old bike. Her lieutenant, Sal, watched all of it with a patience that looked like loyalty and wasn't. Sal was ambitious. Sal had spent 20 years 2 steps behind a woman who never seemed to age or tire or break. And now, finally, he was watching her break in slow motion over a pile of scrap metal. He said the right things. He handled the right problems. And quietly, he began taking meetings he did not mention with men whose last name was Baron. Then someone gave Isabella a name. A small shop on 26th Street. Guy does old European engines, works alone, won't cut a corner to save his own life. His name was Ethan Carter, and on the morning her car pulled up outside his garage, he was standing on a ladder, taping a yellow notice from the bank to the inside of his own front window, so the customers wouldn't see it from the street. Ethan was 38 and tired in the specific way of a man doing a 2-person job alone. The shop had been his father's. Frank Carter had taught him everything he knew about engines and almost nothing about money, and when Frank died the previous winter, quietly, in a hospital bed, holding his son's grease-stained hand, he'd left Ethan the shop, the tools, and $11,000 of debt Ethan hadn't known existed. Since then, it had been Ethan, a coffee pot that made something barely legal, and a dog named Brake who slept in a stack of tires and judged everyone. Ethan was 2 months behind on rent. He had turned down exactly one thing that would have fixed that. A man had offered him good cash the week before to roll back the odometers on a lot of used cars, and Ethan had handed the money back across the counter and gone back to work without a word. He couldn't have explained why if you'd paid him. It simply wasn't a thing his hands would do. So when a woman in a coat, worth more than his building, stepped out of a black car the length of a boat, Ethan looked down from his ladder and said, "We're not really a walk-in kind of place." Isabella was not used to being spoken to like a customer. The 2 men who'd come with her shifted. Ethan didn't notice or didn't care, and she genuinely could not tell which. "I have a motorcycle," she said. "Most people who come here do. It's in pieces. A 74 Guzzi, the 850. And something in his face changed, not because of her, but because of the machine. "The Le Mans," he said quietly. "Somebody let a Le Mans get to pieces?" "There was an accident." He heard the thing underneath the word. He didn't ask. He wiped his hands and said, "Bring it in. I'll look." He never mentioned the $50,000. She realized, standing there in the smell of oil and sunlight, that he had no idea who she was, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. When the crates arrived, Ethan opened them the way you'd open a coffin. Slow, careful, like something inside might still be sleeping. He catalogued the damage without flinching, and then he found the dent, the one anyone could have hammered out in 5 minutes. He got out his notebook and wrote a single line: "Do not touch the dent." Because a man who fixes old machines for a living knows that a flaw left alone for years isn't a flaw. It's a fingerprint. It means someone loved it exactly as it was. He didn't know yet whose bike it was. But that one detail, the thing every other restorer would have smoothed flat on the first day, was about to matter more than anything else in the entire story. He worked on it for 6 weeks, nights mostly after the paying jobs were done. He hand-machined a bracket he couldn't buy. He mixed the tank paint himself, under 3 different lights, until it lied perfectly to the eye. The bank notice stayed taped to the window the whole time. He could have made a phone call, said yes to the odometer man, kept his lights on. He didn't. And then, 3 weeks in, a car with no plates rolled slow past the shop at 2 in the morning twice. Ethan was there. He'd been sleeping on the cot in the back more nights than not. And he heard the lock give. 2 men came in low and quiet and went straight for the Guzzi, already half restored on the lift, and one of them was unbolting the front wheel to make it easier to load when Ethan flipped every light in the shop on at once and stood in the doorway with a tire iron and a dog who had at last found someone worth barking at. "That's not yours," Ethan said. He was outnumbered, and he knew it. But there is a particular thing that happens to men who are used to people being afraid of them when they meet someone who simply isn't. And for one long second, the two intruders didn't know what to do with him. Then a phone lit up in the taller one's pocket. He read something on the screen, and they left. Fast, backward, watching him the whole way out. Not because Ethan had won, because someone, somewhere, had decided the timing was wrong. Ethan stood in his violated shop at 2 in the morning, breathing hard, and looked at the beautiful ruined thing on the lift that men would apparently break in and steal. And for the first time he thought, whose bike is this really? The next morning, his buddy at the parts counter told him, "That's Moretti's bike, Ethan. Isabella Moretti. The restaurant lady. The Mafia lady. Ethan, the whole thing, that's whose kid died on it." Brakes snored in his tires. Ethan set down his coffee. Any reasonable man would have called that number, said the job was finished, taken the $50,000, paid the bank, paid the rent, and walked away rich and alive. And Ethan stood there with a yellow notice on his window and $11,000 of his dead father's debt on his back. And he thought about the dent and the split tank and a stranger who'd said there was an accident like the word weighed 400 pounds. And he decided he was not going to take her money. He couldn't have told you why. It simply wasn't a thing his hands would do. She came for it on a rainy night at 9 o'clock alone, which her people hated, and she did anyway. The shop was dark except for one light, and under it, on the lift, wiped clean and gleaming, was the motorcycle. Not repaired, resurrected, down to the decals, down to the paint, down to the small dent in the tank, untouched, right where the story lived. Isabella Moretti, who had not cried at her own son's funeral because she could not do it in front of the men, put her hand over her mouth in an empty garage and made a sound she had not made in 14 months. When she could speak, she reached into her coat and set the money on his workbench. 50,000, banded, still cold from the car. "Take it," she said. "You earned it." Ethan looked at it the way you'd look at a wet dog that had wandered in. "Parts and my hours come to 4,200, he said. "It's on the clipboard. I wrote it down as I went." "That's not what I offered." "I know what you offered." "Nobody," she said, and there was an edge in it now, because being refused made her feel something she had no name for. Turns down $50,000. He didn't argue with her. He didn't give a speech. He picked up the 4,200, counted it, and pushed the rest of the stack back across the bench toward her with one grease-dark finger, and said the only thing he said about it the entire night, "I'm not going to make money off the worst day of your life." She looked at the yellow notice taped to his window. She was not a stupid woman. She understood exactly what that stack of returned bills could have bought him, and she understood that he was handing it back anyway. And for the first time in more years than she could count, Isabella Moretti was standing in front of a person who wanted nothing from her at all. She took her $4,200 worth of change and left. And then, out of pure spite, because she had to win one thing, she tucked a $100 bill under his terrible coffee pot on the way out. She came back the next week, said the idol sounded rough. It didn't, and he knew it didn't, and he adjusted it anyway. She came back the week after with a bottle of Barolo, a gift, not money, so you can't refuse it, and he opened it, and they drank it out of coffee mugs while the rain came down and Brake begged shamelessly for cheese. She told him about Luca and the Lake Shore Drive ride that never happened, and Ethan didn't try to fix it or fill the silence or tell her the boy was in a better place. He'd buried his own father in the winter. He just listened, which no one in her entire life was permitted to do. It was never as simple as 2 people and a bottle of wine, though. On the nights she came, a black Moretti car sat at the curb with its engine running and a soldier inside pretending to read his phone. Protection Ethan had never asked for and wasn't allowed to refuse. And more than once, a second car with no plates drifted slow past the shop and kept going. Neither of them ever said a word about it. But the danger was always there, idling at the edge of the light, the way it idled at the edge of everything Isabella Moretti touched. And slowly, the way rust becomes a hole, the way a small crack becomes the whole windshield, The most powerful woman in the Chicago underworld fell for a mechanic who still didn't entirely care that she was one. But you do not get to quietly love Isabella Moretti. In her world, a smiling queen is a weak queen, and Sal had been counting on exactly this. He was the one who tipped the Baronis off the bike that night, and he was the one who told them now where the real crack in the wall was. Not the docks, not the money. A garage on 26th Street, and the tired, honest man inside it. Two Baroni men came to see Ethan on a Tuesday. Polite, which was worse. They admired the shop. They mentioned casually how fast a place like this could burn, and how sad it would be, a man alone in it. "You'll stop seeing her," one said, "or all this goes away. And so do you." And Ethan Carter, who wouldn't fix a dent, or roll back an odometer, or take $50,000 he desperately needed, set down his wrench and looked at them like they'd gotten the wrong address. "You can burn the shop," he said. "It's the one thing my father made sure was insured. But you drove over here to make me afraid of loving somebody." He almost laughed. "Fellas, I already loved a machine more than my own safety, and I buried the man who taught me how. You don't have anything I want, and you can't take the thing I've actually got." They weren't ready for that. No one is ever ready for a man with nothing left to sell. When word reached Isabella that the Baronis had stood in Ethan's shop, and worse, how they'd known to, something in her went very cold and very old. The Isabella from the back room on Taylor Street. She found out about Sal within a day because she was still, underneath the grief, the most dangerous person any of these men had ever met. She did not send anyone to hurt him. She simply took everything he had spent 20 years building the shadows to steal, his standing, his cruise, his usefulness to anyone on either side, and left him with his life and nothing to do with it. In their world, that was worse. Sal understood the message. So did everyone watching. Then she did the thing that terrified her more than any rival ever had. She went to the Baronis herself, alone. Walked into their restaurant unbought and unafraid, the way a mechanic had once made her feel, and she did not make a threat. She gave up the contested docks, real territory, real money, real loss of face, in exchange for one thing. The man on 26th Street does not exist to you. The Baron patriarch stared at her. "You're giving up the docks for a grease monkey." "I'm giving up the docks," Isabella said, "because he's the first person in 20 years who didn't want anything from me, and I'm not going to let this life take him the way it takes everything else. I'll tear the whole thing down to the ground before I let you touch him. You know I can. That's the only reason you're going to say yes." It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, standing in an enemy's house and showing him out loud exactly what she loved. And it worked, because even the Baronis could do the math. A woman willing to lose the docks over one man is a woman who will burn down everything else to keep him, and there is no profit in a fight like that. Weeks later, on a clear summer morning, the Guzzi finally rode down Lakeshore Drive. Ethan was on it, the 74 running like it had rolled out of the factory that week, the dent in the tank still there because some things you don't fix, you keep. Isabella sat behind him with her arms around a man who had never once been afraid of her. She'd told him everything by then, the whole ledger, every name, the back room on Taylor Street, all of it. He'd listened the way he always did, and then he'd said the only thing that mattered. "I don't fix things because they're perfect," he told her. "I fix them because somebody loved them." He'd looked at her when he said it. You included. The lake ran silver on one side, and the city Luca had loved rose up grey and gold on the other, and the wind pulled the tears sideways off Isabella's face where no one could see them, and call them weakness. She finally took the ride her son had promised her, and somewhere over the water it occurred to her that Luca had given it to her after all. Not the way anyone planned, but through his stubborn, oil-stained faith that the honest thing is worth more than the profitable one. That faith was the thing that had led her, crate by crate, and refusal by refusal, straight to Ethan. Her boy had spent his short life believing engines told the truth about the people who rode them. In the end, he'd fixed his mother. She had built her whole life on the certainty that everything had a price, that everyone could be bought, frightened or owned, because that was simply what people were. It took a tired mechanic with a bank notice on his window and $4,200 on his clipboard to prove her wrong. Because the things that actually hold a life together, grief, honesty, a dent you refuse to smooth away, the one person who sees you after you've stopped letting anyone look, were never for sale. She just needed someone honest enough to hand the money back before she could finally believe it.